On this episode, we travel to Seattle to learn about Walk Score. Then we talk with an advocate about traffic safety. Finally, we look at a sidewalk initiative in Olympia. Stay tuned. We're in Seattle, Washington, talking with Mike Matthew, who's founder and chairman of Front Seat. What is Front Seat?
Oh, Front Seat is a civic software company. We're finding ways of using software to make the world a better place.
And so what are some of the projects you've worked on?
Oh, the best known is walkscore.com, a way to measure walkability in your neighborhood. But it's been everything from environmental products that we've spun off to political satire.
And Walk Score, measuring walkability, what do you look at when you measure walkability?
Well, walkscore.com measures walkability based on how close you are to the things you want to walk to. So it could be coffee shops, grocery stores, parks, libraries, things like that.
How important is it for walking to be near destinations?
Well, the academic studies say that the best predictor of walking behavior is how close you are to those amenities, and that's what WalkScore measures. So, everyone knows a vibrant neighborhood is a place that it's not just going and smelling the flowers, but it's where you're going and how you build walking into your everyday life.
And you have what WalkScore does measure, but there's also things that it doesn't measure. What are some of the things that it can't capture?
Right. The biggest thing to understand about WalkScore is it really measures the potential to live a car-free lifestyle or a car-light lifestyle. So it's not how much you're going to enjoy living there, right? There are a lot of things that make up a good place to live. WalkScore just helps you find those neighborhoods that have kind of the basic infrastructure that supports wanting to walk on a day-to-day basis. So while it covers things, how close it is to the bar or restaurant that you might want to spend time at, it doesn't say things like how wide the streets are, the block length, other aesthetic kind of things that make pedestrian lifestyle easier.
And are you able to measure actual path that you follow, or is it as the crows fly?
Well, it turns out WalkScore is built on top of Google Maps and Google local data about all the amenities around you. And each time you type in an address, you can type in any address in the U.S. to get a personal score. We send about 100 queries off to Google, and so if we were to do the driving directions or the walking directions on each of those, it's a much bigger task to check out the specific walking path. And they sort of prefer that we do a as the crow flies measure. The amazing thing is that for all that, there's no perfect data source out there. Even if you talk to people who live in the neighborhood, they go, "Oh, really? That place just closed down?" Or, "Oh, the new place just opened up." What we found is that any errors in the data, any of the things that we're very clear on our website about how it doesn't work, doesn't seem to change people's perspective of whether the WalkScore actually captures how walkable that neighborhood is. So people usually go in, they'll type in, where they live, maybe where they work, where their last house was, where they grew up as a child, and it all seems to play out. It's a shorthand, to be sure. It's the 80-20 rule, but people really find that it is a great way to find where in the cities the most walkable places are.
You're talking about 100 queries just for one address. What's involved in putting together something like this? The database you need, the software that you use, how difficult is it?
Well, we started the initial site, took about 2 people just about a month to put together the site, and that's because we were able to build on top of what Google had already done. We spent the next 4 months dealing with all the volume of visitors coming to the site. So it's very different to build a site that supports 1 or 2 users versus 100,000, 200,000. Last month, when we launched our rankings of the top 40 cities in the country, we had more than almost 250,000 visitors to the site, which made us the number 2 real estate site on the internet for that one day.
So when you try to rank neighborhoods in a whole city, what's involved there? Because you got, I don't know how many addresses in an entire city.
Yeah, that was a much bigger project, actually. We took the 40 largest cities in the U.S., and we got the maps, the GIS files that show the shape of the cities. And we basically went block by block across the whole city shape and applied the walk score algorithm. So more than 1 million points all totaled. And basically we weighted those by the population in the neighborhood. So if the whole neighborhood is a park, it doesn't bring the city's average down because no one lives there. But if you have a dense, highly populated area that's very walkable, that'll raise the scores.
If we go to the website, you see the map of the city, color-coded with various levels of walkability. Were there any surprises when you did this, or did people that live there just go, oh yeah, that makes sense?
I think there are a couple of surprises. The biggest surprise is that even in the least walkable cities, there are these pockets of walkability. We call them a walking oasis. So poor Jacksonville, Florida came in number 40 out of the 40 biggest cities in terms of walkability. But there are walkable pockets there. And so if people are really looking for more walkable neighborhoods, really in every city there's a place that they can point to say, we want more like that.
And you mentioned real estate a little while ago. How have people been putting something like WalkScore to use?
I think, WalkScore takes this idea that people have always had, in real estate it's location, 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 but it's always been a subjective measure. And WalkScore turns walkability into an objective measure that people can use to make real estate decisions. Just right here in Seattle, not far from here, there's a 140-unit mixed-use condo development, and the sales agent there said they use WalkScore to sell at least half their properties. It was because of their WalkScore. They had a perfect WalkScore of 100. And they had a big banner in the lobby promoting that it's a perfect walk score. So walk score does sell. And I think when people think of all the benefits of walkability, whether it's the health benefits, the environmental benefits, the local neighborhood social capital and local businesses, and now with $4 gas, the financial benefits, walkability is becoming a much bigger buzzword in real estate.
And if planners looking at walk score and thinking, what can I do to improve my community that's way down there and nowhere near 100? What can be done in terms of, what would make an impact on improving the walk score for an area of a city?
What each neighborhood needs is very different. It's very local. Things that here in Seattle, they're working on completing sidewalks across the whole street grid, but it's going to really vary town by town. I think the biggest thing that WalkScore does is it makes that idea of walkability very tangible for ordinary citizens, people who benefit the most from walkability, and it can take it out of the planning world and bring it into sort of everyday citizen world, and really build support for walkability that the professionals can figure out how to improve.
So what's the ultimate for WalkScore? How would you expect to see it used other than just, I'm curious what my house ranks?
Right, really the long-term vision is that every property should have a WalkScore attached to it, so that I can go to a site and search for 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, WalkScore of 85, show me what you've got. So we think that's going to be the most powerful impact of WalkScore in helping change the way that real estate is built in the U.S.
We're in Seattle, Washington, talking with Andrea Okamsky. How did you get interested in traffic safety?
Well, my interest in pedestrian advocacy started, John, back in 2004 when my son was hit by a car and almost died a block from our home when he left in the morning to go to high school to catch the public bus. And he was in a coma for most of that year and in inpatient and outpatient rehab. He has a traumatic brain injury, and since that time I've met many people who have had losses of their loved ones and or close calls as pedestrians, and I have spent a lot of my time trying to figure out ways for us to get around without killing and maiming each other.
So when we look at those statistics and you have the deaths and the injury is not just something you put on a cast and in a month you're well.
No, in fact, when a 4,000-pound vehicle comes up against a human body, a lot of bad things happen, especially to people's brains. So yeah, it means that even people that just have what's called a minor injury, they'll have post-traumatic stress disorder is a very common outcome from being hit by a car. Very few people that are hit by cars die. Statistically, you have, say, about 400 or 500 people per year that are hit by cars in Seattle, hit by drivers of cars in Seattle, and maybe about 10 of those people die. And maybe a dozen or two have no apparent injury. The rest of them have injuries of varying severities. So it's a huge public health problem, and one that is completely under the radar unless you are someone who has had it happen to you or a friend or a family member.
So as you met these people and talked to these people, what did you find out? What's the nature of the problem?
Well, the problem is that when we get behind the wheels of our cars, we think that we can do things with much greater skill than we in fact can. And we take on the idea that the problem is always the other person. And we need lots of things to happen in order for folks to come to terms with the reality of how difficult and how dangerous it is to operate a motor vehicle. And it's not all on the driver, it goes through all of our systems, the court systems, law enforcement, engineering, and public health. The people who are working in the emergency rooms, and I don't know how they can do it, it's like they're in a war zone, who are experiencing the fallout of crashes that you and I might drive by on a highway. The same emergency responders are seeing this stuff day in and day out. Those are the folks that really need to be put together with the engineers and the driving ed folks so that we can really understand what the whole picture is. There's a cost that comes to moving vehicles through the grid, and it's not all measured in car emissions and the amount of time that it takes to get from point A to point B. There's a cost in blood, flesh, mental health, dollars, economic fallout. The people that have been injured my son won't have the career that he was going to have. The woman who was killed across the street from my home last week, her future is gone. The family that relied on her is left to recover. And it's by and large an invisible journey. We don't bear that burden together.
When you start to analyze death and injury as a public health problem rather than just an engineering problem, does it look different from that perspective?
Yes, it looks completely different because it takes some of the power away from engineers and departments of transportation and hands back to them some measure of accountability. It's not enough to just measure congestion and transportation costs. If they're held accountable for the deaths and injuries on the road in the same way that they now measure travel times and vehicle volumes, then we're going to have different solutions for the problems on our streets.
Now, on the enforcement side of things, what do you see in the way of enforcement here in Seattle?
Enforcement in Seattle is famous. We love to give out jaywalking tickets. There's about, I think, around 2,700 jaywalking tickets that get peeled off to pedestrians each year, compared with anywhere from, say, 400 to 500 tickets that are given to drivers who fail to yield the right-of-way to pedestrians. And that's about the number of pedestrian collisions there are. So I'm guessing that to get a ticket for failure to yield the right-of-way to a pedestrian, you have to hit one. So that's a big problem, and it's understandable. Pedestrians are easy to catch, to give a ticket, and it's a little harder to focus on trying to give a failure to yield ticket to a driver. The answer to a lot of the enforcement issues, though, are kind of manpower issues, and we have the technological solutions for that. Arterial speed cameras, we know death and injuries are occurring on arterials where people are driving the speed that roads are engineered for and not for the posted speed limits. So if we have speed arterial cameras, we can cut down on speeding, and if you cut down on speeding, you're going to cut down on the severity of crashes and the occurrence of crashes. People can respond better at lower speeds. So it's not that we don't have the technology right now. We lack the political will. We need to just kind of go at this and look at the lives that we can save.
What sort of political will do we need? What does city government need to do to make it safer for everybody out there?
Well, that's a big question. The arterial speed cameras are probably a state legislative issue. The city had it on their the city of Seattle had it on their legislative agenda last session. It didn't go very far. There was Senator Ken Jacobson sponsored that bill. I hope he'll sponsor it again, and that other senators and reps can get in there and sign off on that so that it can go through. It doesn't mandate speed cameras. It simply allows jurisdictions to put them in place. And it will save lives. And I think if you're a person in a position to be able to save someone's life, then you should do that.
Everyone thinks they're an above average driver, or at least nobody thinks they're a below average driver. But this isn't Lake Wobegon. Everyone isn't above average. Right. What do we need to do to drivers so they know what their limitations are?
Well, public awareness campaigns are very important, and we've seen from the success of seatbelt campaigns that public awareness campaigns can be really effective. So we need to focus our public awareness and driver education efforts on the issues that are really relevant today. Seatbelts, not so much. We've got almost perfect compliance in Washington State with seatbelt use. Saves lives, no doubt. But it also gives people a false sense of security. It's something that works after you have had a crash. That does nothing. A seatbelt has never saved a pedestrian's life. So in order to save pedestrians' lives, in order to save people in vehicles from serious injury, you need to stop the crash from happening. And for that, you need to make people more aware from the very beginning of their driving that what they're doing is very serious, dangerous, and difficult. And you have to make it harder to get a license, frankly. It's too easy to get a license in this country. And that takes a lot of political will, because we think that we have a right to our cars, that we don't have an obligation, that it's not a privilege, that we have a right to our cars. And that's a tough mindset to overcome. But anyone who cares can visit their local trauma center, and they can learn pretty quickly what a serious, dangerous task it is.
What resources are out there for people that want to know a little more about this subject?
Well, in Washington, Pedestrian Inroads, and that's pedinroads.org, will be lobbying for some further the arterial speed cameras. We successfully lobbied for the cell phone driving ban. Nationally, there's the Partnership for Safe Driving, and that is crashprevention.org, and that's a great resource too.
We're talking with Karen Mesmer, who's a member of the City Council for Olympia, Washington. What role does the City Council play in non-motorized transportation issues?
Well, there's everything from setting the policy, setting the budget, to being advocates, which I am, to reviewing detailed engineering design standards so that we make sure that they're right. So it can be a full range of things that a council can do. But I think the key is to keep bicycling and pedestrian issues at the top of the list and make sure that any actions include attention to that. So it's not just a road project that happens to have a little bit of asphalt going in. It's got to pay attention to the bike and ped issues also.
And Olympia had a referendum on parks and sidewalks. What was that all about?
We identified about a $50 million backlog of sidewalks that, there was an era when we forgot to put in sidewalks in our new developments. Pretty long era, unfortunately. And so we started looking at the budget, looking at the plans, and realizing that we were about $50 million and 150 years away or more from having our sidewalk system repaired and replaced based on the amount of money we were funding it for. So the advocates got together, identified that the utility tax could be used for recreational sidewalks. The Parks Department and the Parks folks were going to be putting a measure on the ballot to raise the utility tax. So we said, you get 2% for parks and we'll get 1% for sidewalks, for recreational sidewalks. That's how it had to be labeled. And mounted a campaign first to get it on the ballot and to get the sidewalks included, and then mounted a campaign to get people to vote for it. So we had a passage of that at 57%, and we only needed 51%. So I think we did a pretty good job. So now we're spending over $1 million a year on sidewalk building, and we're going to get there. It'll be a while, but we're going to get there. $1 million a year is a pretty good expenditure in a town the size of Olympia.
Now, what was the key to having it passed? This is sort of an anti-tax era.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's going to something people like, people don't necessarily like to tax themselves. What was the key?
That we weren't yet in the anti-tax era, although that can happen anywhere, anytime. We were still in a little flush. The economy was looking pretty good at the time, so that was one thing. I think now it might be a little more difficult to pass any tax measure. Olympia is a pretty progressive town. So first, people understand in order to have good infrastructure in parks, they're willing to pay for it. But really the campaign, if you want to call it that, started years before. When I was on the Parks Committee, I made sure that we were asking people in the survey about the Parks Plan about walking. We made sure that we included in the survey about the funding measure, would you pay for sidewalks in addition to parks? And the question came back, yes, they would. So campaigning starts well before you actually get something on the ballot. In fact, we had the campaign signs printed before the City Council put this on the ballot, and sat in the audience and showed them that there would be a campaign that we would support and get the voters to come out for this. So they had a lot of confidence that it was going to go well before they even put it on the ballot. So the campaign really started years before and worked up to a point where the campaign for the minds of the voters was just the final step.
And these are recreational sidewalks, help people get to parks and so on, but there's nothing to keep people from walking on them to get to other types of destinations. How much of the city's sidewalk network are you going to be able to cover with this particular measure, and how much is going to have to go on the other sorts of funds that you've used before?
We still have funding separate in the budget for something that may not look and act like a recreational sidewalk, but it turns out, you're right, just about everything is a recreational sidewalk. So the reason we had to call it that is because you can only have one issue on a ballot measure. And so the issue was recreation and parks. And if we would have just said sidewalks and not included the word recreation, that ballot might have been challenged in court. So it was really a legal issue more than anything, and I think most people recognize that recreational sidewalks are for any number of uses. So that was a legal thing we needed to do.
And now that it's been passed, I assume the money's coming in and you're building stuff?
The money's coming in, and the nice surprise in some ways this last season, this last building season, was that with the housing downturn, concrete contractors were looking for work finally. And we were experiencing really large increases in costs for sidewalk projects over the past couple of years. And this year, the concrete contractors were bidding and competing for sidewalk projects, and we came in with much better prices. So we're going to get more out of it. And we think of it as sort of an economic development measure as well, to put those contractors to work on public projects while they don't have jobs doing the housing market. So it's a win all the way around. And getting it for a little less means we spread it a little further.
While this work for sidewalks, what difference is that going to make to the citizens that put you in office?
Well, the thing I heard when I was doorbelling to campaign for office, the thing I talked with people about and heard from them about was they felt in some areas that their neighborhood didn't feel quite safe to walk in. It felt as if people were driving too fast on their street, they said, and they wanted to go out and take the stroller out and go to the park or go to walk. And so it's going to allow for that, to be able to connect people. Now, we're not building sidewalks on exact neighborhood streets. Those are calm enough already, and we can do traffic calming and street trees to help them. But on the more busy streets, you've got to have a sidewalk, or people aren't going to feel safe. They aren't going to want to walk there. So they're going to go around 3 blocks of a circuit. They go out to a busier street, and there'll be a sidewalk there now. So they can make a circle. They can go visit their neighbors. Maybe they can go get a cup of coffee somewhere, and they'll walk instead of drive a car. So it is health-wise, transportation-wise, neighborly-wise. It's going to improve people's sense of community in Olympia.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.